Hello and welcome to this special edition of Discover Trempealeau County. And unlike a normal episode of Discover Trempealeau County, we're not on any highways, we're not on any byways, or whatever other things Olin used to say at the beginning of the show when he would host. My name is Drew Douglas. I am one of the coordinators here at WTCO, formerly Trempealeau County Community Television. And today we're going to be celebrating the unique history of Discover Trempealeau County. And as I kind of like compare it to if this was a band, it would be like the greatest hits album. We're going to talk about the history of the show. And Olin is not with us today, but the show has been always, as he said, about unique and interesting people that he talks to throughout the county. We have one of them here today. He is a unique and interesting person, and he is not only the former director here at our TV studio, but the founding member of the studio, and he taped the majority of the Discover Trempealeau County episodes, Mr. Wade Britzius. Wade, thanks for being here today.
Hey, Drew, thanks for having me here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
This is fun. I really like the idea of reminiscing a little about good old Discover Trempealeau County and TCC TV, as we always called it.
Yeah, and I think Discover Trempealeau County, or DTC, as some of our people here at the studio refer to it, is kind of one of those pillars of the station. A lot of people would tune in to see a lot of local things and people, and to narrow that down, I kind of made a little laundry list of, I don't have a list of the shows in front of me, but I kind of narrowed it down to categories. Olin and other hosts, we'll talk more about that later, but talk to a variety of, and including but not excluding, collectors, musicians, farmers, historians, performers, athletes, entrepreneurs, architects, writers, veterans, educators, and hobbyists.
It was fun. It was
that'd
really
be a pretty
fun.
good cross-section of all the people you've talked to?
Yeah, that sounds like a good description. I mean, we had a heck of a good time. When I was down here in the courthouse working for the first when was the first show? 98, 10 years almost, doing all kinds of local shows. Olin Fimreite worked upstairs.
Now, was he with the land management or tourism at that time?
It was called Conservation Service.
Yes.
The U.S., he was a federal employee for the Conservation Service because they were housed in the courthouse. And Olin used to come down here all the time to go to the bathroom.
Okay.
So Olin would come traipsing by, and him and I kind of became friends. You know, he's a if there ever was a history buff, it's him. Mm-hmm. And I'm a bit of that too. You know, the history of Trempealeau County was something we would chat about. He was really interested in what we were doing here. They were so happy to have a local television component to this cable TV system that was delivering programs to the county, but we wanted local stuff. And he and I would get to talk, and somewhere along the way, I realized how interested he was in Trempealeau County and every aspect of it, the history of it, and the guy knew this county. You know, you go for a drive with him, and he'll point to a field and say, "I laid out contour strips there." Just about everywhere he goes, I put that dam in over there, and he knows the farmers and their names and the people in town.
Parents' names.
Parents,
kids'
yeah,
names.
from way back. He grew up here. He knows the whole deal.
Now he grew up in Oliva, did he not?
That's right. Well, on a farm outside of Oliva. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
His mother lived to be over 100 years old up in that area, and so somewhere along the way, I get the idea this guy knows everything, and to have a local, fun, newsy, interesting highlights show about the county would be something that people would really enjoy, I bet, and talk to him about it. He was really interested in doing that, and the original idea, I was going to call it Rollin' with Olin.
Oh. That would have looked different in the credits. But people probably, you know, even though sometimes I know because I had been in TV a little while and then the radio before that, sometimes even though you might come up with a catchy name, you know, like the boss sometimes shoots it down because, well, people don't know what that is.
Yeah.
You know, because looking at that name sounds fun, but, you know, you don't necessarily get like interviews or history from the title.
No,
and people, especially today, as farther technology has gone on, their attention spans seem to get smaller and smaller.
Oh,
so if you don't catch them with like what you're about in the first 10 to 15 seconds, they're clicking on to the next thing.
Actually, I think there's a show called Discover Wisconsin or something. Yeah. I think we jumped on that idea. Well, yeah, that's Discovery, that's good. And then we decided to try it. And right around in there, I can't remember which came first, Olin retired. Mm-hmm. It was time he got bought out early on a good retirement package, and he retired. And then he had even more time to do this show. And so we tried to make a new show every 2 weeks.
Wow.
And it was, to me, it was the most fun part of my job because I'd get out of the studio,
Yeah.
go out in the community. He would come up with the ideas, or he and I would come up with the ideas. I'd call the people, he'd call the people. And we just followed our noses and had a great time. What's going on around here that's interesting or unique, people and things. Trempealeau County is a vast and tremendously interesting place.
Now, you said that he was a real big history buff, but did he ever actually had any experience in being in front of a camera or any kind of broadcasting experience?
No, he didn't.
You just knew that he liked talking to people.
I knew that he liked talking to people.
And somehow it would just, once he got used to it, it would just translate to camera.
You know what really works for him, I saw this, I don't know if I knew it right away, but I saw it develop, and he's a master of curiosity. Mm-hmm. The guy is just endlessly curious about everything that he runs into. And he acts kind of naive and asks people questions. So he can relate to an older woman about rose mauling or knitting, and he can relate to somebody there's a software company up in Oliva at the time.
Yeah, MI, right?
Yeah, and everything agricultural, of course, he knew up and down and in and out, having grown up on a farm, and everything historical, and you name it, the guy was curious, and he has a way of doing things that's just unique, because he'll be with somebody and he'll say, "Now that thing over there with those 4 legs and a flat top on it. Now, what do you call that, a table? Is that what that is?" And he could get anybody talking, anybody. People who were shy or scared or nervous, but they were good at something, he could draw them out.
So he was really good at being a proxy or surrogate for the audience. That even though he knew what was going on, he knew how to ask the right questions for people who didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, he really was. And I could give him ideas, and he would take them. If I'd say, "Well, what about this or that?" And I loved shooting the pictures, and then I would come back here and edit it. I'd usually spend about a day every 2 weeks editing one of those shows, because they got to be a thing. People liked them. It was really popular, and it was fun to do, so we kind of focused on them in a way.
You mentioned 1998. That was the first show?
Welcome to Discover Trempealeau County. My name is Olin Fimreite. We have many interesting things here in Trempealeau County, many well-kept secrets that people can see and do right here in Trempealeau County. And we're going to have a little series of programs relating to some of these well-kept secrets in the hills and valleys of the county.
You remember what the first show was?
I think either if it wasn't the first show, it was the second show or something like that. We realized that there's these artistic painters just outside of Whitehall here that were getting to be really well known and got a big business going, and the bus tours were stopping in there. That's another thing Olin was involved in, was bus tours. But anyway, we could talk about that, but we won't. We decided to go out there with Wendy Schaefer and Kevin Miles. Miles Schaefer Art
Schaefer
Studio.
Miles Studio, yeah.
They called it Green Hills Art Studio, I think.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that you have the art gallery here in one of the buildings, which was a former chicken coop or something.
Yes,
Don't look like that anymore. The Green Hills Art Gallery. It's quite appropriate name. Where did you come up with the name? Who came up with that name?
Well, that was the name of the farm, and so that's pretty much, we just used that for the building here. Pretty much now we've become known internationally as Schaefer Miles Fine Art. So, it's because it's a rural farm
Green
setting.
Hill.
Yeah, and it's definitely green. That's for
the
sure.
registered name of this farm, and we kept the name for the gallery because it seemed appropriate. That's where we are, and it is a beautiful place.
On a typical picture, or painting, I guess you'd call it, on a typical painting, what percentage of the work would be done by each of you on one painting?
Well, I usually say Wendy does like 85% of the painting, and I do the balance. But my small percentage takes as much time as hers, if that makes any sense.
He spends a lot of time thinking.
Yeah, my part's more analytical and more detail-oriented, so it's more time-consuming, even though she puts most of the paint on the canvas. So most of the painting is hers per se, but a lot of the tweaking and the finished detail is mine, which takes as much time. But, we share everything evenly, and we always, and throughout history, artists have worked independently and put in or worked together but only put one name on it or something, whereas we decided to use both our names. Technically, to achieve what we like in our paintings, which is a sense of light and depth and realism, and to put people in it, it takes a lot of process of building up layers, and it's very technical, so it's time-consuming. We're solicited a lot by organizations and fundraising groups and stuff, and we can actually give people artwork, to auction and for benefits and that kind of thing. And that's a really nice feeling, because as an artist, you do what you do because you love it so much, and you would probably give it away if you could. If the world didn't demand that you pay your rent and that you pay your gas and electric bill, you would do it for free. So when you can get the opportunity to, give artwork for a good cause or for something that's going to benefit people, I find that really satisfying. I think that's a good thing.
They're very successful. They even had some of their paintings are made into puzzles and sold in Japan.
Wow.
And I think they were on a cruise ship a couple times selling their paintings, and they go to big art shows around the country.
Yeah. Well, if you can sell a painting, that's people pay a lot of money for an original.
And one of the early ones, or somewhere along the way, we did was the train depot. We went over there too.
When was this really abandoned by the railroad and sold privately?
Well, our sources say that back in 1968 it was sold to the local lumber yard for use in woodworking. And it was held by various woodworking craftsmen up until 2003, I believe, is when the city got involved in it. A group of private citizens contacted the city council and mayor at that time with an interest of keeping the building in its preserved state, and actually doing some renovation to keep it part of Whitehall. The railroad is a very significant part of Whitehall's history, dating back to the 1870s when it was first put in. That's the principal reason why Whitehall is located where it is now. It was basically shifted to locate next to where the railroad went. The railroad was put in from Lake Michigan to Minnesota to take advantage of the Mississippi River to Lake Michigan traffic. And so the railroad is a very historic, significant part of Whitehall in how we become a city and how eventually it became the Trempealeau County seat.
Barb, you have a bunch of pictures on the table here. Maybe you could just describe them briefly.
Sure. Well, the first ones that we have, the photo in the framed one here, a gentleman was looking at it looks like his lumber, checking his lumber out. There used to be warehouses, like Lyle had said, all along the tracks for each of the individual businesses. And if you look further down the track, you'll see the original depot building, which would have been on the north side of our current tracks. And all the buildings that are on this photo are now gone, but they used to line the whole track through Whitehall here. And the photo above it, there's women and children. They're waiting for the train to come in, but you look at the costumes on these people. They are just great. That's what you wore back then. If you can imagine in the heat of July being dressed with the bonnets and everything that these gals were in.
And in this book is the depot, the original depot, maybe taken in 1938, I think I remember it was taken, and you can see the coal chute. Wait till you get a close-up of that, what Lyle and Rita talked about, the coal chute.
Right, you can see that really well on that photo, as well on the one postcard above it. You see that standing off in the horizon. It's really quite neat. What we have on the tables here also are some of the original Whitehall Times Blair Banner newspapers, and in there it talks about the progress of the depot, when they started building it, and then the next one will say that they poured the foundation, and maybe a few weeks later they were putting in water and sewer, or the brick was going on the building, and then finally on Christmas Eve of 1914, the first passenger train came through.
There's not many of those train depots left in Wisconsin, the original actual depots.
Yeah, and that's been designated as a historical place, hasn't it?
Definitely, yes, it has. They even got a grant to restore it a few years ago.
Yeah.
And so anything historical, we had a lot of fun. And so, you know, I'm looking just 98. Oh, some other ones we did. We did the Pigeon Creek Lutheran Church.
When was this church started?
Well, this church was established in 1866. The church itself was built in 1872. To my knowledge, it's the second oldest church in the county.
Well, you know, there's one thing in this church that really sets it apart from any church in Trempealeau County and maybe Wisconsin. I've never seen anything like what you're going to show us before. So maybe, Edith, you could explain the chandelier here in this church. It's one of a kind, I would say, in maybe Wisconsin.
Okay, this chandelier has been in our church probably since it was built, but we have two of them. The other one is being restored. If we were to put it up, then we would have to move this one too, because I guess when it was up, the one was up further and this one was back. But this was used at for Lenten services this past year. They did have it lit. I didn't happen to be here, but they said it was beautiful. Everybody that enters the church, that's the first thing they look at is that chandelier.
Yeah, this chandelier is not electricity. This chandelier is, these are lamps. These are lamps, and I suppose it's kerosene. Kerosene.
Because you see the...
And there's 12 lamps there, so it's quite a job just to get them lit. And I suppose they create a little soot, too, as well.
Them afterwards, I'm sure, is just as big a job. I think our janitor said maybe he wouldn't do this another year.
As I looked around the church here, I noticed the pews. Now, I see that they're not all original because you got a cushion on the pews, but are these original pews?
Yes, these are the original pews. We did antique them several years ago and then put the new pads on.
You know,
And that's now, correct me if I'm mistaken, but that is no longer there.
correct.
And it was
burned
struck
down.
by lightning about 10 years ago?
Something like that. Yeah,
roughly, yeah.
Burned. I see there's kind of got a little commemorative park there now.
Yeah, it's like, I don't remember what it was. Wasn't there like a bench or something there? Or a pew?
So, I think
or it's
so.
supposed
I
to
just
be
saw it.
in commemoration of the church. They put like a
Yeah,
pew where you can sit down and
It
everything.
was a beautiful little classic small rural American church.
Mm-hmm.
And then another one that we made right out in that same area, there was a guy named Bill Butler. He and his wife are still out there, I think. They were one of the first people in this county. It was quite an unusual thing to have a dairy farm
With sheep.
with sheep.
The sheep farm, yeah.
Yeah. And they had the little creamery set up there. They were making their own yogurt and cheeses.
And this, by the way, is I think Bill mentions the only grade A cheese or sheep milking plant, I guess you'd call it, in the United States.
Yeah, we were fortunate. We're the first grade A sheep dairy plant in the country. At this point, I think the only one. Wisconsin helped us along. The State Department of Agriculture helped us along in making sure we met the grade A dairy standards when we started operation here, because yogurt is considered a grade A product, so we had to meet their grade A standards.
So let me ask you, what is the name of your product?
Butler Farms sheep milk yogurt. We have it in 3 flavors. We have a plain, which is unsweetened. And we also have maple, which is just made with pure maple syrup, no sugar. And then we also started with a berry yogurt this year, which is a 4-berry, strawberry, blueberry, blackberry, and raspberry, and also sugar.
The parlor is a very primitive, if you will. Single 12 is just pipes, dock piping that we used. We screwed them into the ceiling, into the floor, use a pig mat, and we milk into this little pail right here. When we first started milking back in 1990, there was no company in the United States that made sheep milking equipment. So we had to have this imported from Europe. So a company out of Great Britain, we had this imported, and there's probably not too many of these guys left.
Another interesting one in those early days was the Arnold House.
Yeah.
The
Is that
AA
in
Arnold
Trempealeau?
House. That's in Galesville.
In Galesville. Yeah.
Right, that's the old East Side Farm. It's right across from the high school there, old historic farmstead. The Arnolds are the ones that donated the land where the county fairground is now.
Sure.
And beautiful old house there, and there was a lady living there as a caretaker named Audrey.
Well, I understand Mr. Arnold is quite a influential leader, both in agriculture and also politically.
That's right. He was in the state assembly, and he was also in the Senate. and he did a lot of lecturing on purebred cattle, hogs, and sheep. That was his big interest after the Civil War. He never went back to practice law after the Civil War.
And you do have some pictures I noticed on the organ there. Who are they?
That's Mary Arnold, and
Who is she? Is she
she was Alex Arnold's wife, second wife.
Alex Arnold's wife, and how about the man on the right-hand side of the piano?
That's Alex Ahab Arnold.
That's the person that built this home in 1874. Came from New York lawyer.
Right, he was a New York and Ohio lawyer.
What's unusual about this is the circular stairs going all the way up to the top. And boy, what a construction. The carpenters that built this really knew what they were doing, didn't they? You almost get dizzy coming up. That's quite a staircase. And how many steps are there in here? Do you know?
I never counted them. Too busy climbing them.
Well, it's certainly unique, unusual, and a different feature of the Arnold House. And if the people come by for a visit, can they climb up here?
Oh, yes, they can come up here. Some of them don't want to because it's pretty high, and they don't like to climb all the stairs, but it is an interesting feature.
I remember looking at that show, it's like, I wonder if that place is haunted, because I don't think this when I look at modern architecture, but when I look at houses of that particular period, it's like, first thing, I don't know why, jumps into my head is like, I wonder if it's haunted.
Really?
When I see old houses, I just think is that haunted?
Haunted house. Well, this one has had a kind of an official story of being a haunted house. Oh. And she was colorful and give people tours. And so it's all on camera here on one of those old recordings with her. She describes that in her experience.
There's some rumors that I've heard that this house might be inhabited by something other than humans. Is there any truth to that?
Oh, yes, I have seen the man, and he scared me half to death. But it was just a black silhouette, and he was in the hallway in my apartment during the daytime, but it was a dark January day, and I caught sight of him out of the corner of my eye, and I said, how did he get in when I have the door locked? But when I looked right at him, he was not there. I said, well, I tell my heart that, because it was really pounding. And I have smelled baking, bread and cinnamon rolls, and I've smelled stew and soup being cooked. And every once in a while I catch a movement on the corner of my eye, which I don't know what it is.
Did a fellow ghost or whatever, did he talk?
No, but he had his hands on his hips like he was saying, okay, what are you doing in my house?
And another one early on, as long as we're down there, in the history of this county, the old main historical and community arts center, it's called now in Galesville. Trempealeau County wasn't a county originally. There was Jackson County and there was Pepin County, and it was great big counties. And George Gale, the founder of Galesville, in 1854, was able to go to the state legislature and get him to carve out Trempealeau County.
Well, Jim, we're walking around Old Main here in Gale College. I know there's some other buildings that are scattered around. Is this part of the college, or was that?
In later years, from 1901 until 1938, Gale College was connected with the Lutheran Church, and these buildings, over here a dormitory and gymnasium, and here a dormitory, these were built sometime fairly early in the 1900s.
Well, Jim and I are right next to Judge Gale's grave, right here at the campus, right behind Old Main. Open to the public here?
Yes, it is. Why don't I tell you a little bit about George Gale here? He decided to move to La Crosse and establish a law office there. He became a district judge, and he wanted to establish a university. Remember that interest in education and knowledge. He wanted to establish a university, But La Crosse didn't feel ready for it. La Crosse, you have any any La Crosse friends who would like to know that there was a time when they didn't want the university? Anyway, that's where Judge Gale wanted to establish it, but they felt they were a working man's town, a lumbering town. They just didn't feel the need for a university. So when he was riding the circuit, and George Gale came up along the Black River and Beaver Creek, he saw this area that he thought would be just a beautiful site for the location to found a city. And he bought land. He bought a lot of land, and he went back to the state legislature where he had connections and was able to persuade them to establish Trempealeau County. Galesville would be the county seat, and he established a sawmill and a grist mill, and in 1854 he got the charter to establish Galesville University.
Now I want to talk to you ask you a few questions about Johnny Clem. He was a world Civil War hero.
Well, yeah, he was a young kid in Ohio and wanted to become involved in the war effort, but he was too young. And the story is that a regiment of infantry from Michigan was marching through town, and he asked to join up with them, and they said, no, you're too young, but we need a drummer boy. So he became the drummer boy of Chickamauga, and also was in the Battle of Shiloh, which incidentally Walt Disney made into a movie called Kid Shiloh, I believe. And so the story of Johnny Clem has been popularized here in the 20th century. But once he, after the war, he continued in the military and eventually ended up, I think, second lieutenant. And from there, he came here to Wisconsin and to teach military tactics.
Well, another show we did fairly early on that was a popular one and was fun to do was we visited the Opera House. You know, the Opera House has kind of been an ongoing thing for quite a few years.
There have been a lot of debate about the restoration and the funding and all that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
There was a big project in 1969. I took photographs in there for a historic project I was doing. The place was a shambles. It was just a the beautiful old auditorium was just a storage place for a bunch of junk. And they got a grant, and Dr. Baxa, the dentist over in Independence, who's still active around here, I think he led the charge on that, but they got a lot of community people involved. And they remodeled into a beautiful performance space.
Tell us about the Friends of City Hall. Is that what you call your group?
Correct. We're sort of a group of local people that have had an interest in the history of our City Hall. Our City Hall, as you know, sits right in the center of downtown. It's a building that was let go as far as not much maintenance or upkeep over about 20 years. So it was looking a little shabby. And our organization came before the City Council, and we talked about the pros and the cons of keeping the building or tearing down the building. We went ahead and had a local architect, a regional architect, and a state architect come and take a look at the building and approve that the building was structurally sound. It just hadn't been maintained in quite a few years, so it looked a little unkempt. We talked to the city about fixing up the exterior of the building as far as keeping the birds and the bats and the pigeons out. We did have quite a bit of pigeon problems here for a while. And as far as keeping the weather out, the city went ahead and approved $100,000 to restore the brick, to restore the steeple of the clock tower, and to fix up the windows and keep the weather and the animals out. Then, once that was done, the Friends of City Hall were given the okay by the City Council to work on the second floor. So when I first came up here, it was nothing but dirt, storage area, and just this particle and insulation board. We had heard stories about a beautiful maple floor underneath all this, so it wasn't until the City Council gave our local group, the Friends of City Hall, the okay to start the restoration project and gave us the okay to remove this particle board and insulation that we did see the maple wood floor. And it was decided amongst our group that we should go ahead and find donations, get some volunteer labor, and restore that maple floor. And people that have been dancing on it right now says it's one of the best dance floors that they've been on in quite some time.
Well, when was the last kind of major event before this thing became dilapidated and wasn't used? You know that, or when it was?
In the 1950s, the school district began building a gymnasium, and this place was the scene of all the class graduations, class plays for the school, a lot of events of that type, and other public events that required a large room. When the gymnasium was built on the ground floor on the other side of town, this place pretty much shut down in the mid-1950s. It was still being used occasionally for dances and for some meetings and that type of thing. The last event occurred here in 1969, I believe it was, when the Independence Creamery Association had its annual meeting. They'd been having their annual meetings in this room since 1910, so they had a long history of being in this place. So decline after the mid-1950s, and then nothing after 1970. So the building had a lot of use for everything from school events to the vaudeville entertainment. The American Legion here in the 1920s installed professional movie equipment in this room next to us. In the restoration, we covered over the projection holes and so on, but the room is still there. We left it intact. And they showed movies until the early 1950s on a regular basis.
Were the clocks working all through these years, or did they go dead too at one point?
We know at one period of time, at least in the late 80s and early 90s, for several years that they weren't working. And the city did look into the possibility of fixing it. It was going to cost many thousands of dollars to have a professional come in and do that. And then they discovered a local man who had worked in Milwaukee as a machinist. Now there goes the clock now.
What's going on?
Well, we just struck the half hour here. That's how this operates. There's a brake mechanism, a fan that moves around that keeps this thing from going out of control, I'm told, and that's how it works.
So there's one ring on the half hour, and then when it's on the hour, the total rings for the hour.
As I was saying, that machinist was able to fix this clock for us for $17 in parts, and it was going to cost thousands to have a professional do it. So it's just another example for those that are out watching the show. If you have something of historic value in your town, don't overlook your own local resources for repairing and maintenance and fixing, because it can be done. There's a lot of talent in these small communities.
You know, curling in Centerville, you know, that's a hotbed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they've had a lot of people come out of that curling club in Centerville and go to the nationals and even the international world competition. I just heard one of them say they did world competition.
That's one of the few things you can actually see in Centerville is when you stop is that big curling club, or I guess it's kind of a community center too.
Yeah,
but it's a big chunk of it is the curling club.
Yep, yep.
Let me ask you, when did Centerville when the folks began curling here in Centerville?
Well, they started in '49, I think, and they had been curling in Galesville, I think, before that, probably, going over there. And then they kind of split up the two clubs, or the club there, and built the club here. And I think that started curling here in about 50, maybe, when they had the first bonspiel. 49 or 50, 49.
49 was the first bonspiel.
What's a bonspiel?
We have other teams come in from different clubs for a weekend to play.
This club that we have here, behind us here, that's relatively new, isn't it, Robin?
Yes. It's about, 4 years old, Doug, at the most? And it was just a whole group of individuals in the area and organizations. It was the town, the Lions Club, Marl Farms gave us the land, people that worked here, just everybody donated. It was really a group effort, and we're very lucky. As of now, anyway, if the gas bill stays down, we're out of debt.
Well, as Wade and I drove in today, we noticed the sign that says Galesville Curling and Burns Club. That kind of threw us. Burns Club. curling we finally kind of understand a little bit about. But who wants to answer where that Burns name comes from? Carol?
Yes, Bobby Burns really wasn't a curler. The way I understand, he was a poet, and he was from Scotland. And of course, the rocks that we use are quarried from the shores of Scotland. That's where the stones come from. And Bobby Burns wrote these poems about curling, and that's how it really all got started. Many clubs use his name as basic because of that fact. Our club has been going since, I just see the picture here, 1882, when they curled on the slough out of town here. And also we have a picture here where they curled on the Lake Marinuka, and it shows a picture of the Gilsel Concert Band at that time and the curlers out there. That was early 1900s by the time they got there. But this is back in 1882. As long as I'm talking, I might as well tell about the old rink that was here. That was, I know, early 1900s or late 1800s. There's a few people. There's one person I know was Theodore Scarlett that curled with, and that is natural ice, way before they had artificial ice like we use now. And this is a picture here of the front of the building. 2 or 3 of those people I also knew in the same picture up here.
Doc, Seisha, you have a picture of the Seisha boys, I think.
Yes, got to promote the family here a little bit. My grandfather in the middle, and Dad on one side, and his brother, and then 3 cousins. It's the curling Seishas. That picture's from sometime in the 50s.
And Don, what do you have?
I have a little brochure from Curling Bonspiel. Now that was done in 1887, and the prices have changed a little bit, because the prices here, you could dance for 50 cents, tickets for the festival were 25 cents, and supper was 25 cents. And I don't think nowadays you're going to be able to get anything for Bonspiel or any place for that much money. So they had a good time, even though they did have good Bonspiels, and they really enjoyed it.
When is it eligible to start sweeping? Is there any position in the rink here or the sheet where they can start, or where they can't start before a certain point?
They can start sweeping the minute the man lets go of the rock, or the person delivering the rock, as far as that goes. But usually, unless they have an idea of what the weight is, and you can sweep for weight or line, you'll hear the skip holler, "Sweep." You heard him yell, "Yeah," right now. And they immediately start to sweep, which will make this rock go further because it's light.
What happens if they hit the rock, with the broom?
The rock is disqualified. You have to take it off immediately. The skip right now is holding the broom, and the gentleman shooting will be aiming at that broom. He's already told them what he wants to do. The minute this gentleman comes out of the hack that's delivering, the skip will be watching for angle, and he'll be watching for weight, and he'll call sweeping or not to see if they're wide, narrow, heavy, light, if the ice is red right, and usually it is, and they'll sweep hard to make the shot. And you heard him saying, "Sweep hard, sweep hard."
Zach, we have another kind of layout here. What score would this particular team in yellow get with this particular layout here?
Right now, yellow looks like it has 3, because, well, first of all, that one closest to the center is the one that would count right away. And then you have 2 other ones that are closer than any red one. So now you'd have 3 for yellow.
Okay, why don't one of your friends move the red rock in a little bit? Okay, now we've changed 1 rock here. Now explain the scoring with this setup.
Now yellow would just have 1 because they're closest to the center. And now none of the other rocks count because there's 1 yellow closest to the center, and then the next closest rock is red.
And kind of a fun one I see on the list here that we did in '02. We went and did a show at the funeral home here in Whitehall.
Oh yeah, that'd be Jack Funeral Home, yeah.
Yeah.
Scott?
Scott House.
Yeah.
You know him, okay.
Yeah.
So, what goes on in a funeral home? It's always,
Scott, after the doctor or the coroner has pronounced the person dead, what's the next step then?
Well, we'll get in touch with the family and see if they have any questions of us at the time, or if there's anybody that they want us to notify. And then what we'll usually try and do is set up a time that would be convenient for them to come in and make arrangements. And if they're going to have a traditional funeral service, which would mean that the body would be present for the service, we'll get permission from them to do the embalming. And the embalming is something that we like to take care of as soon as we can.
Could I ask a little question? Embalming is a word most of us know, but we don't really know what it is. I think it has something to do with preservation of the body.
Right. It's short-term preservation. What you're trying to do is preserve the body so that you can get through the funeral service, and the visitation and the funeral service. In the process, probably from start to finish, it takes probably 2 hours approximately. It can be longer than that, less than that, depending on the cause of death and the time interval. And that's why we always like to do the embalming as quickly as we can, as early as possible, just because the longer you wait, the more problems you have as far as distribution of the chemicals and so forth. So it's always, you have better results if you can get that done as quickly as you can.
Is embalming, is that a requirement of the state? And if it's not, what percentage of the people are involved in embalming?
It's not a legal state requirement. The only time embalming is required is if the person is going to be on a public transfer or airfare, common carrier, that's what I was looking for. In other words, airplanes or trains, if they're going out of state, then the body has to be embalmed. But if there's no state law saying that you cannot have a funeral service and not have that body embalmed, there is no such law. So it's certainly highly recommended. I think most people realize that if you have a dead human body, and after a few days things change, and I think we encourage it certainly for health reasons for us that are working with that dead human body. And again, if you're going to have visitation that's open to the public, it's just certainly encouraged to have that body embalmed.
Right behind you, Scott, you have some other with different, mom and grandma and different designs and so forth. Well, how are they used and where?
What these are for is if, say, a family was into farm, or they farmed, these panels will just go into the back cover of the casket, and you can see they have like the farming, or if a person was into fishing, you have those. And again, it's all with the personalization, kind of goes hand in hand with the corners.
Where did you say these go?
These go, if we can look back at this casket, they would just go in the back panel of the casket, and there's Velcro strips that are put on, and they're just placed right in the back of the casket. And also I have, if you've seen the caskets with the drawers in them, and what that is, if families want to bring in any personal belongings, it just gives them a little more secure of a place to put them than just loosely in the casket. If they bring in pictures, or then there's even stationery for if grandkids want to write letters to grandma or grandpa. And for the visitations, I've had them closed and then covered just like what some of the other caskets are, or the drawer will remain open for the visitations.
A few things a person should do before you die, isn't there? Like, say, for example, buying a lot in the cemetery.
Well, I think the main thing is to make sure that you talk over with your family what your wishes are. And that's the most important thing that I tell families is make sure that, you talk to your family about what you want to have as far as a funeral service, if you want a funeral service, and just make sure that they're aware of what your wishes are.
I've looked through that show, and it amazed me on, you think that would be such a dour, depressing subject to talk about, but Olin was amazingly upbeat. And I even want to say he made a crack about like about how often he would go to funerals.
And we're going to be talking about things that are maybe a little difficult to talk about, and something that we as humans seem to have a tendency to want to avoid and not talk about. So even people at my age don't know too much about funerals, even though I've been to 3 this last week.
It's like, did he really just say that during his show?
When you're involved in a community, your friends die, and
well,
Olin knows everybody,
especially when you live in the same area for 50+ years, you're going to know a lot of people who die.
Now here's one of my favorite stories. So you remember I was telling you how Olin asks the innocent questions?
Yeah.
So he's talking to Scott House, and he says, "Well, Scott, now, I mean, how do you know, like when somebody's, how do you really know they're dead?" Scott goes, "Cut!" And we stopped the tape. That's not on the tape, but we had to stop for take a break. that was a classic Olin comment, or even better than classic. I don't know, something like that. Oh, another big one that got a lot of coverage was, the ever very unusual, very outstanding Soldiers Walk in Arcadia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There it is. That's, some people say there's some things in Washington, D.C. don't even measure up to that in terms of sculptures and coverage of so much stuff.
Sure.
And so Ron Wanek himself, the guy who was kind of behind that and behind Ashley Furniture, we did two full 45-minute tours. We spent 2 full days there at different times, completing that tour of everything on Soldiers Walk and all the sculptures up in the auditorium space they have up there, and that was quite a production.
Sure.
Well, this is what we call a rotunda, and you see the large flagpole there, the 60-foot flagpole. That's the beginning of time in Wisconsin, 1848. And it goes forward from there 500 years down to the other end of the walk, which is 500 meters long. So to my right here, you see Andrew Jackson, who is from the War of 1812. And then you see the Mexican War, 1846 to 1848, just before time in Wisconsin, and a Mexican soldier, or Mexican War era soldier there. You see Thaddeus Kosciuszko there from the War of Independence, sometimes called the Revolutionary War. And then, of course, you see George Washington on a horse, and that's as he was greeting the troops at Valley Forge. Well, this starts in 1854 when the first settlers came here to this area, and obviously 1848 was a flagpole area there, where that marks the year 1848, and we've moved up here to the year 1854. And you can see the monuments that are embedded into the walk, and it shows events of Arcadia and the area as you walk through time.
Yeah. Countryside Lefse.
Yeah.
You ever been to, where it's all produced? Or most
in
of
Blair, isn't it?
Blair. Yeah. You want to see some hard workers, you go in there, especially, we've toured the old plant. How many bags of potatoes do they use? But here's all these women standing there and with all these griddles going. Temperature's about 100 degrees, and they're rolling like this hour after hour after hour.
Tell us a little of the background. How did you get into it? And where did the idea of making Lefse begin?
The business started out where the Rainbow Restaurant is, out on 53, and my dad started it in the basement of that drive-in. That's the drive-in that he built. And then back then, people pretty much made a lot of Lefse themselves, so it was kind of a smaller market. And then being in there through the years, the women started working more and started to develop more of a market for it, so they moved downtown in Blair there in the old locker plant.
Let me ask you this. How did you come up with the name Countryside? That's kind of a unique name for Lefse. How did you come up with it? Who came up with that name, and how did you arrive at that name?
That name was the name of the drive-in. So the drive-in before it was Rainbow was Countryside. So they just kept that same name for the Lefse product.
And so you've had you've got a lot of secret recipes and things here. You make lefse a unique way, but you use some of the old world techniques.
It takes a bigger building to make it the hard way, using real potatoes and hand rolling it, but then the product is better. So that's why we kind of pretty much go year round now.
Well, he just loaded a heck of a bunch of sacks into this machine, and I think, what do they just started the machine, so does that mean it's peeling, beginning to peel?
Yep, right now he's got the peeler on, and he'll put the water on and let him scuff them up, get the peelings off, and then he'll shut this down and load up his kettle, or kettles. Yep.
So how many bags did he put into that hopper to begin the operation? You had a whole pallet here.
I think he put in he's probably peeling up about 500 or 600 pounds right now. He had peeled some up earlier too, but now he's trying to get ahead again for his next batch. So, and then the cold potatoes, we take them out of there and they bring them into here. They run them through a grinder.
Oh, is that the grinder over in that corner?
They'll rice them through that.
When you say rice them, what do you mean?
They're almost like a hamburger. It comes through like that, and the smaller the particles in that potato, the more moist it is, because the flour will go around that particle better. So that grinder has to grind them up. We use a smaller plate than hamburger to get them.
Let me ask you this: is that the potatoes go through that? And the flour is added in this mixing?
Exactly right. They'll have the kettle over there. They'll run the potatoes into that. We have days in here where we might change the mix 3 or 4 times in one day because it's falling apart. They're trying to lift it up, it falls apart, or it's drier, and you have to keep adjusting to make good lefse. It's not the same every day.
It's all rolled out, isn't it, by hand?
Yep, when the mixers make the balls and these guys come out, and there is machines that will roll out lefse. There's no doubt about that, but the dough has to be tougher. It pretty much loses its consistency. Some people even add gum to the ingredients so that it'll roll it out with these machines. So whenever you see lefse, they don't always tell you it's machine rolled, but if you don't have a good taste to it, it probably has been machine rolled.
Have you ever seen Around the Farm Table on public television in Wisconsin?
I have not only seen it, I have actually met Inga Witcher before.
She's getting to be well known. She's the star of the show Around the Farm Table, which is on Wisconsin Public Television every week, and I think Wednesday nights. And I like to say I gave her start.
Well, you kind of did, yeah.
Me and Olin, because she was up toward Oliva, he knew about her and said, there's this girl, there's this young woman with dairy cows up there.
You've had a rather interesting background. You're born and raised, I guess, on a dairy farm. Mm-hmm. Just go into your life just a little bit now you got here again.
Sit down and get comfortable. I was raised on an 80-cow dairy farm out about an hour north of Seattle, Washington. And the dairy prices fell, and my parents didn't know what to do, but they didn't want to sell their property. So we put on an environmentally sound golf course. And we had 18 holes, and life was great. And then my father was offered a job starting an organic dairy farm in Virginia. So we moved about an hour outside of D.C. and started up a farm there where we had a herd of Ayrshires, and we made an organic cheese and organic butter and things like that. And so that's where I learned how to make cheese. And then from there...
you went to school and took some training?
My parents sent me to art school because my father has always wanted an artist in the family. But that didn't work out so well. I also went to beauty school, but that didn't work out so well because I'm more of a free spirit, I suppose, not a put your nose to the grindstone kind of a girl, So after dropping out of many schools, I started a little business doing some landscaping. And I had a few clients and loved that, but hated when people would tell me where to put a plant and sort of got frustrated with life. And then my parents had this beautiful farm up here that was sat vacant. And so they just threw it out there, hey, do you want a dairy farm? And I thought about it and said, why on earth would I ever want a dairy farm? Are you kidding me? And then I was at a Paul Simon concert in Maryland and had everything I owned in my car. And after the concert, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to move to Wisconsin tomorrow. Like, you know, I might as well. So I drove up here and I bought cows a couple months later, and yikes, now I'm a dairy farmer.
Now you got your nose to the grindstone, I think.
Not so much. No. You know, my philosophy on life is, you know, I live to live. I don't live to work. You know, I work to live and things like that. And, you know, a lot of people, they're out there working like 18 hours a day. I don't get it. I'm just not one of those people. And, you know, I get my things done, and, you know, and if there's something else I want to do, then I'll go do it. I've spent many hours at libraries just flipping through pages of books and things like that. But yeah.
I read in the paper also you go to town, Osseo once in a while, just to talk to people.
I do, because it gets so lonely, because I'm out here twiddling my thumbs like, someone be my friend, you know, because it's hard to meet friends when you just move here, when, you know, it's like, oh, and I can't really go out a whole lot because then I have to get up at 5 o'clock the next morning to milk. So it's kind of like
We just thought, how many people, you drive by these things all the time. Like you might drive past the Arnold House and you see a sign. But what's the story?
Right.
What's the story?
Yeah, you get ideas from all over the place.
Yeah, so we would just grab the story wherever we went. And I had ideas and he had ideas. We always had a long list of ideas of the next show we're going to do. Mm-hmm. And it just kept going, and people enjoyed watching it, you know. And
yeah, and still do.
Still do, yeah.
So if anyone in our audience, if this has piqued your interest, we do have all of these shows, well, that we've talked about, at least we have. If anyone would like to order them, they are for sale. We can make DVDs, or we can also put them on a flash drive for you. And there's probably many more that you haven't even seen. So and now, thanks to the internet and streaming, they're a lot more available than they ever have been if anyone else wants to see them or know about some local histories. So,
great stuff.
All right, well, this has been our look back at Discover Trempealeau County, more than 20 years of the show, and well over 100 episodes. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you later.
And we're right near a bee yard, and that's why I got my mask on. I think they kind of like Norwegians, I think. And we're going to look at some of the restoration with Gary Moen. He's the president of this organization.
That's Eric Moen.
Eric Moen, sorry. So I'm not very good at names. I do remember my own on occasion.
Yeah.
Maybe, Zach, you can introduce your friend.
Over here we have Cam Delaney. He's the skip of our team.
He's the what of your team?
Skip.
What does that mean?
He shoots the last rocks.
Okay, we're going to look. You have to realize Wade and I know nothing about this game, so we're going to be asking you some pretty dumb questions. How long does it take you to learn that technique?
Oh, I don't know. I've been doing it for about 18 years here and some at home before I came here.
You've been here. You're one of the oldest employees they have here then, 18 years.
You mean the longest I've worked here, or the oldest?
I mean, not the oldest. Sorry about that. I could get hit by a rolling pin real easy.
Cable television is the swellest thing they got.